Well, here we are again, writing a tale as a living puppet. I am unsure how much time has passed, with my mind no longer sleeping. With sunlight never reaching through the curtains, all time blurs together. The dates on my device changes, leaping forward and backwards before I even realize the movement. I've given up trying to keep track. Segments of time are ephemeral, just like everything else here. Be it the creatures that flash into existence, or the abnormalities that occur. I guess it wouldn't be right to say everything is transitory. I'm here. The memories and emotions given to me by those beings remain. The screen in front of me doesn't disappear through time, and any progress seems to remain even if the clock is rewound and the dates turn back, though the contents may change. It's peculiar. It feels as if I've written hundreds upon hundreds of these biographies, yet none at the same time. As if my consciousness is bouncing around time like a rubber ball that was thrown in an empty room. I know it's written even when everything is altered, and in a moment's notice I am writing a different story. It's a strange feeling. Everything is strange here in this space. As I'm writing, I look around and see the walls ripple as the worms move through. Sometimes they'll leave void-like holes. In those holes something primal resides. Something that stares back when I look. When I dare to glance at those holes, my eyes lock into place, staring into that abyss until the holes shrink to the size of pinholes and disappear. Blood seeps out of the walls at times as well. At first I found myself frightened by it, but when comparing to the void, I'd rather have the blood, if changes will occur inevitably. But that's enough of my own predicament. I fear spending any more time on this may anger that which is watching and controlling me. In any case, I'm here to write, and you are here to see a story unfold, even if it may lead you to the slaughter like sheep. So let us begin the tale of what was implanted in my brain. The clock strikes 11:50 p.m. My eyes shoot open and they scan around the room. It was dark, the only light being the glowing numbers of the alarm clock that had been set and put onto the bedside table last night. The wind was howling, the sound of it and the alarm clock being all there was. My hands slid out of the covers of my blanket, haphazardly flailing around until it found what it was looking for, the button to turn off the alarm. All was a blur in my mind, yet I knew there was a reason I had to wake up. It was a Wednesday and my parents would have killed me if they ever knew I was up so late on a school day. But there was an impulse that my body recalled, even if the thought drifted away in my slumber. Laying in that state was not leading to any answers, so I chose to get up. The blanket over me slid off as my body sat up, and I tried once more to recall the reason of my premature wake-up call. My fingers pressed into my temples as if they were a button that would scan through the ocean of thoughts in my mind. A memory surfaced, giving me the reason for my awakening not long after. It was during lunch. My friends and I had gone into the school bathrooms following a friend of ours named John. John was strange, not in a bad way per se. But after his parents divorced, he began causing problems with his newfound short fuse. He'd sometimes lash out at others. Recently, however, his demeanor improved upon gaining a topic of obsession. John was consumed by the occult. I believe his father encouraged him to dive deeper into the occult, since it seemed to mellow John out. Once he had an outlet, he did behave more like the John we knew. Save for the oddities that came with being involved with the stuff he was in. Once he really started getting into spooky stuff, he would have some weird fortune-telling cards, or he'd bring a glass ball with him to school. For this reason, when John had asked us to follow him, we all had a feeling whatever John had been planning would be strange, but we already agreed a while ago to play along for John's sake. When we arrived at our destination, I wasn't sure what would happen. The best guess I could muster at the time is he would try reading our fortunes. He did seem to enjoy doing that. During the walk, we all chatted about school, teachers we didn't like, schoolwork we forgot, and not long after we arrived at the bathroom. We entered the bathroom single file. John went over to shut the doors and flicked the lights off, casting the room in darkness once we were all inside. The bathroom was cramped, or at the very least felt that way. It was never large, and the dark pressed in on us, adding to that feeling. There were no windows, and the door didn't allow even a sliver of light from the space between the door and the frame. Even though no one could see each other's expression, we all felt the same. There was a slight chill in the air that felt unnatural. Yet that cold would be ignored by all as a trick of the imagination to combat the unease developing in our chests. After a few moments, a dim light appeared beside John, as well as behind him in the bathroom mirror. It was a fake candle, an electric one teachers would put in their homerooms for Christmas. He reached into his pocket in the dim light. He pulled out another, and another, until he had given one to each of us. The slight glow of all the candles barely illuminated our features, and I saw the apprehension on some of my other friends' faces confirming what I had thought earlier. This time was different, as if something was lurking in the shadows, but the shadows were all around us, waiting for the moment to strike, cornering us all. We stood waiting for John's words until a kid a grade below us opened the bathroom door. But when he saw what we were doing, he stood there puzzled for a moment, then let the door softly close and backed away. A few of us laughed at that moment. We imagined walking into the situation ourselves, and at least for me, I would have done the exact same thing. The tension was cut and the mood lightened slightly. Maybe if that kid never opened the door, our nerves would have been too strong to overcome, and someone would have saw what was off. No one noticed, not even I at the time, but within the mirror one could see a vague outline around John, something wrapping around him, embracing his whole body and blurring his outline in shadows. John coughed to refocus our attention on him. Once all our focus landed onto John, he began pulling out a few pieces of paper from his pocket. At the very least, they looked like paper. They were crumpled up into little balls. They reminded me of the spitballs that me and my friends used to shoot at each other when we were younger. John held the paper balls in his available palm and told each of us to grab one. The idea of touching something possibly covered in spit had me reluctant to follow his instructions. My thoughts were interrupted with a glare that seemed to radiate cold. My eyes met John, and all I thought was that it didn't feel like John. His eyes were akin to something not quite human. I felt that there was no choice but to grab the paper ball. So with reluctance in my movement, I picked one up with my pointer finger and thumb. The ball was dry. There was some give to it, and the texture felt kind of rubbery. After feeling it, the ball fell from my fingers into my palm. He seemed pleased once his palm was emptied of the strange balls, and that cold that was in his eyes had vanished. John instructed us to put the ball of paper under the fake candle. He called it something else, but it sounded strange. Whatever he was uttering wasn't English. We all followed along John's tune with the unease being dissipated by that brief moment of levity from earlier. It was better to go with this stuff or he may become even more extreme. That was the thought leading us to follow John's orders. When we didn't play along with his games, he'd just get more obsessed and fell into bad habits such as isolation. We wanted to help him, and from this goal we would often play along, unless it involved harming ourselves. Most of the time, the things John would have us do is pick cards out of a deck, or say something like Bloody Mary in a mirror, or inside a box. They were just harmless things. The only time I can recall of us shutting him down is when he wanted us to cut our hands for blood. He wasn't one bit pleased with our refusal, and the next day he was in the hospital due to blood loss. Excluding the things we refused, nothing ever had happened when we followed his instructions before, so even though things felt wrong, I continued. It didn't seem dangerous and was fairly tame, besides the awful feeling in my chest. I can recall him muttering some words I didn't understand for a minute or so. Then he told us to put the item under our pillows, then to burn the balls with a candle at 12. It was an odd thing to do, but I was an awful liar. John would tell immediately if he were to ask me if I followed the instructions. That gaze John gave me had my skin crawl, and if he knew I skipped out on the ritual, I didn't want to see his face like that again. Memories had crept back into my mind. With the purpose for my awakening now recalled, I groaned and pulled the rest of the blanket off myself. I wonder where he even found that ritual. Where was it? Was it from a book his father gave him? Was it from an online forum? And how'd he get those balls? I guess it doesn't matter anymore. My mind's thoughts were diverted once I noticed the change of my room. It was colder than my room had ever been before. The slight shock that cold gave to me had my mind on alert. It was like being in the school bathroom again, but dialed up to 11. The room felt as if the windows were left open in a winter cold snap, and there appeared to be frost on the windows even though it was summer. It just left me with unpleasant memories, so I pushed that train of thought aside. The plan was to do the ritual or whatever it was in here, but I just wanted to get out to warm up, and I needed to leave the room anyway, so why not do it out of the room? Slipping my hand under the pillow, grasping the paper ball, it felt rougher somehow than it once was yesterday. My weight shifted as I moved my feet over the edge of the bed, causing a slight creak of the frame. My foot hit the floor, and it was like standing on ice. Yet I still continued standing, even if frost was nipping at my toes. It was one step after the next, tiptoeing around, ensuring no noise came from my steps. And after what must have been eternity, with my feet freezing, I made it to the door. The creaking of the door was deafening in the silence as it slid open, and I prayed it wasn't loud enough to wake up my parents. My head peeked from the door that was just slightly ajar, and it was apparent all lights were off. It seemed everyone was asleep. The plan should go off without a hitch. With the memory of yesterday now refreshed in my mind, I crept down the stairs to the kitchen to use a lighter and a candle. My body skipped to the steps that would creak. As I descended down, it felt warmer the further I went. Once I had reached the floor, I continued on to the kitchen. Turning on the lights felt taboo at this time. Luckily, I knew the lighter was on top of the fridge. After some feeling around, the lighter made its way into my grasp. And with the newfound light source, it did not take long to find the candle. By the time everything was set up, the clock on the microwave read 11:59, which meant it was time to begin. With the candle lit, there was a smell of pumpkin in the air. The smell was so thick due to being so close to the source. My nostrils were burning. I wanted this to be finished as quickly as possible, so without much hesitation, I threw the ball into the fire. The ball began to burn immediately when the flames licked it. The ball grew black, then colors of green and blue and red emerged from inside. They danced around in the air. They were entrancing. My eyes could not be peeled away. The colors moved around the room, bobbing up and down, illuminating different sections of the kitchen. They maneuvered around airily. Their faint glow lit up the room in their corresponding colors. I couldn't help but feel amazed, seeing something so unnatural with my own eyes. At the time, I didn't even realize they were coming closer until it became too late. The demeanor of the orbs changed once they had reached a certain distance to me. The colors darted forward and reached my chest before I had time to even register what was occurring. An intense feeling of heat was felt where they landed. I attempted to pull back, but they were stuck on. My hands furiously patted down on the spot where they were, but it just phased through them, like moving one's hand through a flame. They burnt a hole through my shirt, charring it around the edges of the hole, then seemingly melted it into my skin without a burn mark. Even with no damage where the things had landed, it felt as if someone had poured burning oil on my skin, and it was eating away at my flesh. Then it abruptly stopped after all of them completed moving in. My chest had a peculiar sensation after the lights went in. There was some bubbling underneath, like my insides being boiled. There was a warmth emanating from inside my chest, yet my skin was already cool to the touch. Shock led me to stand there processing what just occurred. It would have remained that way if not for the snuffing out of the candle and the creeping cold that made its way into the room. The cold stirred my consciousness into action. I could feel my heart beating heavily, and it was all I could hear. In a rush, everything was put back to where it belonged, and I quietly made my way to my bedroom. Something unexplainable happened, but the priority was to hide all that occurred, as what I feared more was my parents' ire. Upon entering my bedroom, I noticed the cold was gone. That cold, whatever it was, must have followed to the kitchen after the ritual. But at least it wasn't here anymore, so I could sleep. I took refuge in my bed and hid under the covers. The unusual warmth in my chest still remained, but it ebbed and flowed, with the peaks of warmth becoming less with each iteration. The warmth eventually faded, and not long after my body felt heavy. Thoughts jumbled together, and before I made sense of them, I fell asleep. The light came through the curtains and stirred me awake. The alarm clock had read 6:30 a.m. I questioned whether what happened last night was just a vivid dream. There was a moment of relief until when looking down at my chest, the hole through my shirt remained. The black scorch marks from the entering of whatever those lights were still present. Thoughts on what to do flooded my mind, yet no matter how much ideas went through my head, there was no solution. And when there isn't a solution, isn't it best to just ignore it? At the time it seemed to be the best option. So although it was early, I readied myself for the day. I went to school as per normal. John wasn't there. He wasn't there the day after or the next either. I wanted to ask him what the ritual was about. And my friends had nothing happen when they did it, so they knew nothing. Or maybe they all just acted as if they followed John's instructions. After a week, the worry we held became overbearing. Did John hurt himself? None of us had been able to contact him even when we called, so no one knew. After a particularly windy day, I can recall going to John's house with my friends. The house emanated an ominous feeling, but with my eyes looking at everyone else, I could see no one else felt it. We rang the doorbell and waited a few moments. Then those moments turned to minutes, but no one came to answer. One of my friends were fed up with waiting and decided to try the doorknob. His name was Ray. Ray was always the bravest one of us, taking the lead of our group, and it was no different this time. His hand touched the door. Almost immediately he pulled it back. It was freezing. It was so cold he had thought his hand was shocked. He steeled his nerves and tried again, this time using his sleeve as a divider between his hand and the doorknob. The knob turned and the door opened. It squeaked as the opening widened, revealing nothing but a dark space. All of us called John's name, but there was no reply. There was no sound in there at all. Apprehensively, me and the boy who had opened the door entered. That feeling in my chest was getting stronger. The burning was growing. But just as it appeared, it vanished. Turning around, I saw the rest of my friends standing at the doorway. There was fear on their face. Ray tried to reassure them it was safe, but they wouldn't budge. Without another option, we continued on. Ray pulled out his phone to give us some vision once we moved away far enough from the door. I recall noting the house felt bigger than I remembered. No lights were on. Ray attempted flipping a few of the switches, yet nothing occurred. When he shone his light at the bulbs, we could tell they were shattered. Slivers of glass laid on the floor below the light sockets. The further we ventured in, my mind thought of the house like a giant empty freezer room. The darkness and the layer of frost on the wall reminded me of being locked in a freezer room as punishment. It felt claustrophobic, just like the bathroom and my room had when this very same cold was present. I tried my best to hide my emotions to not distract Ray. He was too focused to notice it. His mind was preoccupied and on edge from everything wrong with this. We attempted opening windows along the way, but they were coated with ice, making our attempts futile. The ice was thick enough to block out any light. We couldn't even feel the window. The first room we made our way into was the kitchen. It was empty, nothing indicating someone was there. It was just icy, no signs of life. The first floor was checked after what felt like a few more minutes. We called John, but there was still no answer, and with no sign of anyone, we made our way to the staircase leading to the basement where John's room was. There was scuttling noise from under our feet, but Ray didn't hear it. Or maybe he convinced himself it was his imagination like I had done. The feeling of dread that emanated from below kept me from moving as if a barrier was placed up. I attempted to warn Ray. However, he wasn't having any of it. He was more worried about John than himself. He was always like that. He stepped onto the staircase, his foot slipped on the icy step, and I heard his body tumble down. At first I heard him make noises with each step he hit, but eventually there was just silence. I stood there. I couldn't see anything except the faint hint of light from down the stairs where Ray's phone laid. Even with my body screaming at me to run, I decided to check on Ray. I wasn't even sure I would get out without the light anyways. We didn't go to John's house that often, and it was different than I remembered as well. I sat on the freezing floor and scooted down the slick steps. My butt felt frozen. It may have looked funny, however no one was there to see. When I reached the bottom of the steps, the phone laid at the bottom, however Ray's body was nowhere to be seen. Picking up the phone, something ran over my hand. I jumped. It felt like claws in my hands, but it vanished before I could see it. I hastily picked up the phone and spinned the light around, looking for whatever had touched me. Yet nothing was seen. Ray wasn't around either. I didn't understand how Ray could have gotten so far without light, or why he didn't call for me. Maybe he was concussed, which had me worried. There was still skittering around, but I didn't see where it came from. I kept moving forward, watching my feet to avoid stepping on Ray or whatever was living down here. The place opened up in the back to a hallway. I glanced at the right and saw Ray. I called to him, but there was no reply. He was splayed out on the floor. His leg looked broken. I rushed over to him, but when I saw him closer I immediately sprung back. I can still see the sight. There were these scorpion creatures, colored colors of the rainbows, crawling in and out of his body, burrowing inside and eating him. Parts of the muscle under his skin were exposed, and on other parts I could see bone. I hope he died on the fall. If those killed him, I can't imagine how painful it must have been. In my rush to get out, I slipped and spun around. The phone dropped on the ground, pointing up, and my face looked up to the ceiling where the light hit. I spotted dozens of the creatures crawling in and out of the walls. They moved around, and clicking sounds as their legs hit the ice echoed through the basement. Some began to move towards me. I attempted to lift myself off the ground, but I slipped once more. I thought it was the end, but when they had gotten to me, they didn't attack. Some crawled over my skin, but even when I flung them off, they didn't resist. Eventually, I managed to raise my body up and grab the phone. The pain from my back made it clear there would be a big bruise, but it was the least of my worries. I made my way to the stairs, stumbling up it as I almost tumbled down a few times, yet I managed to reach the top. As fast as my legs would take me, I ran out of the house. Our friends were waiting there confused. I was gasping for air. My legs were aching from some of the furniture I had stumbled into along the way. However, seeing my friends gave me relief even with this pain. I attempted to tell them what happened to Ray, but they looked at me worryingly. The looks they had given me confused me to no end. When I asked what was wrong, the thing they told me made no sense. They told me I was the only one who entered the house, that there never was a Ray in our group. They thought I had hit my head. I attempted to remind them of Ray, of all the times we had together, but all the memories were different from mine. I knew Ray was down there, but they somehow forgot him. How could that be? No matter what I did, they didn't remember. Even when I showed them his phone, they stated it was mine. There was no way it should have been mine, yet when I turned it on, it unlocked immediately with my face. I had no clue what was going on. The bruises all on me worried them, and they wanted me to go to the hospital. But I told them I was fine. I just needed to go back home. I started to question if I had really hit my head. My friends had helped me get back home. When I opened the door, my parents were having dinner. Once the door shut, their yelling began, furious at how late I was home. They didn't care about my injuries, rather they wanted me to go up to my room. There was no room for negotiation. I did attempt to explain everything to them, but they just overcame my voice with their yelling. So being defeated, I just listened. I made my way up the steps and went to my room as they instructed. My mind still processing everything. No one remembered. I didn't understand. There wasn't a chance I imagined everything. But no one would believe me. I didn't think concussions created a whole new person in my mind. All I could do was pretend everything was normal and fine, and for some reason my mind was calmer than it should have been. I didn't know the reason why. Days continued like they always did. Eventually my friends had forgotten John as well. Sometimes he would almost be brought up, but it was as if their brains were wiped once they almost remembered. I kept moving through the motions, acting as if all was well. It had started after a week, I believe. There was some movement under my skin. It slithered and wiggled around. Sometimes there were sharp points like toothpicks underneath. I stared at my arm the first time it happened, but I couldn't see it. Maybe whatever they were too small. There should have been fear in my mind, but it was serene. I thought about informing my parents, but they would think I was just lying, and for making up such a story would probably end up with me having a personal time with my father's belt. The fear from my own parents seemed like the only worry in my mind. Even the idea of things being underneath my skin didn't cause fear, but rather complacency. I felt hopeless. There was nothing I could do, and more of those sensations were felt underneath my skin. And when I stopped even attempting to worry about it, I felt happy. It was a few, then a few hundred. There were things crawling under my skin. They were skittering in my ribcage, and I swear I felt them in my skull rattling around when I moved. Sometimes it felt as if they were pinching things inside my body. There was no pain, but a pressure that had me feeling sick for a moment. They were tearing me apart. I'd still go to school, but my friends distanced themselves from me. I attempted to ask them why, but they never answered. They would just back away like they never even knew me. My parents never gave me attention to begin with, so they rarely checked on me. Even if all this stuff didn't happen, it would have been the same. I felt isolated. But I guess with all the things inside of me, I wasn't alone. Fever came over me after the first week. It was bad enough to where I could barely move. My parents had called me off, so I just laid there in my bed, head staring at the ceiling. I began to feel whatever was under my skin was growing larger. The bumps on my skin were now visible as they moved, but they withdrawed deeper when someone else came into the room. All I could think of while laying there was that sickening scuttling noise I heard from that basement and Ray's body as it was being eaten. I'm not sure how long I was in that state. My brain was becoming fuzzy. I was slipping in and out of consciousness frequently. In my last waking moments, I saw them through my hazy vision. My skin was rupturing as something dug its way out. There were colors of the rainbow exiting the new holes. Some were small, no larger than a fingernail, and others were the size of rats. I should have felt fear, but there was relief that it was all over. That whatever happened to me was finally coming to an end. My breathing felt more and more labored as the scorpion-like creatures exited out. The outside of my vision became black, and not long after all was dark. I felt cold. I wasn't breathing anymore. My heart wasn't beating anymore, and I heard scraping as pieces of meat was plucked from my bones. Something cold was around me again, wrapping around me and strangling me. It was the same in the bathroom, the same thing in my room, the same thing in John's house. I felt a moment of fear, and then nothing.